Hey, are you hiring? If you answered yes, let XenTegra Staffing help staff your IT people needs. Head over to XenTegra.com/XenTegra Staffing to find out more. XenTegra Staffing, we can staff your IT people needs. Welcome to another edition of the Citrix Session with your hosts, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton, your source for all things Citrix.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 56 of this Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got with me, of course, Bill Sutton, Director of Services, and Ben Rogers, our local Citrix sales engineer. Guys, how's it going?
Going fine, Andy.
So this is
doing good this morning, Andy. Thanks for asking.
Sure. So this is a little interesting for us. For whatever reason, we didn't have a specific topic defined, and we've made a commitment to our listeners that we keep them coming. And then I jumped on, or earlier today, asked you guys to pick a topic, and I jumped on a few minutes late as usual. And you guys were talking about some security-related events that have happened in the wild in the last 24, 48 hours. What was that all about?
Well, this FireEye breach that happened last week is pretty scary because now you have the bad actors that have the good guys' tools, and whether they'll make it on the black market or whatever, but these hackers are going to reverse engineer those tools, and now they'll have, they'll know what the good guys are looking at and what they're looking for when an attack's going on. So to me, being an old administrator and responsible for a business and their IT infrastructure, that's pretty scary. And then a little bit more of the onion that's peeling back is it actually looked like the attack was propagated through an update of a security system. So, you've got the bad actors now attacking security systems that are meant to protect us. So just, again, from an old customer viewpoint, this would terrify me if I was sitting responsible for a business's IT infrastructure and had these tools deployed within my network.
Yeah, I want you to explain briefly, Ben, what FireEye is. I'm also going to go on a rant here. I tried while you were talking to pull up FireEye and read a little bit more about it. And the old days we were worried about getting exploited, and we still are. That's what we're going to talk about here now. At the same time, trying to read that article, I got popped up 4 different times with people trying to sell me something. Have both of you guys watched the Netflix documentary about the social media?
Oh, yeah, I've watched it.
Ben,
yes, I've watched it also. Yeah, I have.
My biggest takeaway in that thing, and what just happened to me, right? I'm looking at a free website to try to learn something, and I try to get sold to 2 or 3 times. If it's free, you are the product, which to me is probably more infuriating than what we're going to talk about here, which is the malware and the security and people trying to steal stuff from you is just being trying to be sold to death. But that's a whole different topic, and maybe we'll cover that on a different day. Ben, you want to give us a quick overview of what FireEye is?
FireEye was a cybersecurity company, and where they've really shined is, they've got great tools that will help with prevention, but they've also been involved in a lot of remediation cases brought in after the fact. And so for me in healthcare, you would see them a lot at HIMSS, have a big booth. They would do some marvelous demos, but they were really one of the first companies that was very aggressive about, hunting down attackers, making sure networks were clean, making sure resources within inside the networks were clean. So I was a little bit shocked by this. And they have a series of tools that they use when they go into a breach that they can put in the environment to kind of give them a baseline of what's going on. And they're always learning. And so, again, my shock and fear with this would be, now the bad actors have some of their tools, and what kind of knowledge are they going to gain by reverse engineering some of these tools? And of course, FireEye is going to have to react to this and, mediate whatever they can in their tools and develop new tools. But just a very interesting moment for me in security where you're seeing bad actors actually attack the systems that are meant to protect the environments. And so I don't know if this is unprecedented. I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but again, being an old administrator and responsible for the IT resources of a company. A little bit terrifying to me.
Yeah, and I think it's actually expanded some, Ben. I'm looking at an article in the Wall Street Journal today about this attack on some federal government agencies that is believed to have been in part related to the FireEye intrusion. So it's moving beyond just FireEye. It looks like, using some of their tools, like you said.
So this is all interesting, and it really ties into what we decided to cover today, which is a security best practices article from Citrix about multi-factor authentication, which a lot of times the way bad people get into that area where they can update the code and then take advantage and exploit the code is through weakness at the perimeter in terms of usernames and passwords, which the three of us have seen over and over again. I can go back to a attack on a government agency in South Carolina probably 15 years ago now. That was simply the air conditioning guy would get in through Citrix, and that password was just a static username and password that never changed, and that's how they exploited that system. But hey, is there any specific, other than this similar thing happening at Citrix a few years ago, is there anything specific around FireEye and Citrix that we want to cover here for our listeners, and where those two may tie in together?
Not that I'm aware of. Think higher powers above me. I have not heard anything about this. Of course, in our engineering meeting on Friday, we were discussing some vulnerabilities, and I did not know about this one yet. And then this morning on our chat rooms, man, it was just a buzz of this. And again, a lot of people are just reacting to how scary it is for these tools to be out in the wild, and for them to have the ability to be reversed engineered. So nothing directly tied to Citrix, but I can tell you a lot of the gearheads like myself within the company are discussing this, and it's something the whole industry is going to have to react to. You have a cornerstone like this that has something bad happen, it takes you back for a little bit.
Yeah. So guys, what's the best way to secure a system on the internet?
Unplug the network cable.
Unplug it, right? Yeah, that joke's been around a long time, but it's still true.
I have a funny story. One of my first bosses that I worked for, he put a PC in the middle of a conference room with all of the C-levels, and he asked them if they thought that computer was secure. And, he went around the table, and I would say 7 out of 10 said yes. And he picked up the computer and left the room, and he basically came back in and said, there's no 100% security. Nothing's 100% secure. So that told me at an early age that you don't have 100% security, but you do strive for being as secure as you can within the realm of your economic means. Mm-hmm. And again, when you go out to parties like FireEye and you buy these products, it does give you a sense of security. Like, I'm a big fan of Fortinet, and Fortinet's had their trouble over the years, but when I installed that into my systems, I had a great security that I was sitting behind a good firewall. The ADC is not a firewall, but it's a good edge point system that can secure, and I'd be very comfortable with that. But all vendors are vulnerable at some point in time, and I think this proves it.
Yeah, I think it's funny you're bringing that story up. Last night, I'm always looking for something to watch as I'm falling asleep, and I started watching this documentary on Netflix around Osama bin Laden's hard drive, and they were doing all their communication through paper as well as USB drive, and they were actually off the internet, I guess. Yeah, no, they were off the internet. And they were doing it through USB drives and things, and when they raided that location, they got I think 5 hard drives, maybe 15 hard drives, and now they're going back through it and looking to figure out what all went down there, all the stuff that was happening. And one of the things they pointed out early, because I fell asleep, was these computers were all used computers, so they don't even know if what's on there was bin Laden and his people, or whether it was the people that had the computers before bin Laden got a hold of it. It's interesting. They went through all that precaution at the same time. They didn't wipe and reinstall the operating system. I thought that was funny. All right. Well, guys,
interesting times we live in, my friend.
So the blog that we decided was for 2019, and it's we wanted to cover some of the basic ideas here. I mean, let's start with let's start with using the most philosophical ideas around protecting against just someone exploiting who we are to get into these systems. And it starts with Hector walking through just some of the basics of what happened at Citrix. Ben, do you know about the exploit that happened there a couple years ago?
I do not, Andy. That was before my time with Citrix.
This is going to be funny and hopefully take this the right way, but I think I actually remember you as an end user, as a customer, talking to me about this one, and as an end user saying, hey, Citrix is a security company. If you guys, if you, XenTegra, Citrix, have this problem, should we be trusting you? Exactly what we're talking about with FireEye. Do you remember that conversation?
I would have to say I remember us having similar conversations on multiple vendors with that, but I'm going to play it safe here, man. I like I said before, man, all vendors are susceptible to these types of breaches and effects. So if you and I had that conversation, I trust we did, but again, I'm going to play a little safe here.
Well, and that's totally understandable. And yes, I mean, that's the thing to highlight. If you're Microsoft, if you're a Linux operating system, if you're even some SaaS application that does nothing but a calculator, you are exploitable. Some human being created those ones and zeros, and they left gaps, whether they want to admit it or not. They left gaps, and somebody who can get in and understand those gaps can exploit it. There's no way around it. So
exactly, and nothing against software vendors, but I can't tell you how many times I've been on the phone with the right person that had the right password to get into the system when nobody else could. So I'm not totally convinced that a lot of vendors still don't have, super secret back doors that let them in when all else fails. And I mean, I've spent many a night with EMR vendors, and won't mention any names, but I can tell you 2 of them got people up that got into the system when it was time for us to get back in. And so to your point, multiple ways of getting in the system, whether they're public knowledge or not.
Well, that actually brings a question to mind for me. In the world of SaaS, true software as a service delivered through some cloud of some type, and you almost wonder if that doesn't become more of a reality, because at that point it's not your system on your location that they're somehow figuring out how to get into for you. It's your system, it's their system that you're just accessing real time. And so the idea that there are backdoors or ways to create backdoors on the fly, that's got to be more real than ever in that situation, I would think.
Yeah, and considering that it's all your data there, it certainly gives a lot of folks concern.
Yeah. Well, I guess that brings a whole other question. Is it actually really ever your data if it's living in their world? It's
true.
You're just borrowing it.
Yeah.
It's like me telling my kids, this is my house. Well, technically the bank owns the house, and I'm just renting it from them until I pay it off. In that case, you never pay it off. All right, guys. So let's see. It starts off with Hector going into the kind of a definition of what password spraying is. Either one of you guys want to recap what he's saying there?
Yeah, I mean, basically what he's saying here is that the bad actors are leveraging passwords that have been exploited or have been identified in prior exploits or breaches, as well as creating their own password lists from common passwords, as well as other means of generating passwords based on variations, I think, of other former breaches. I know that a lot of folks, myself included to some degree, use the same password for different websites. And of course, if you use the same password across sites, particularly a lot of sites, and one of those sites gets breached, it goes into a database somewhere that hackers can access and then use that password to spray other sites to see if it works. And a lot of times it does. And that's where we have folks that have Gmail accounts that get hacked or Facebook accounts that get hacked, is this whole concept of password spraying, because a lot of sites only need a username and password. Would you agree, Ben?
Totally. I mean, I would have to warn people that, I would one of my scare tactics to new employees that have been there for a while is, don't ever put your password underneath your keyboard, which is a famous what people would do, or the little black book that sits in the drawer right beside their desk. It's like I would always threaten them with, don't think that the people that are cleaning the building are just cleaners that have nothing else to do. They could be hired guns to come in here and see how many accounts they could get. You never can tell. My boss used to like to walk around the building and identify all the papers that had HIPAA information on them, and she would mark them out. And then, obviously after that, the employees would have to come and do HR training and all that. But yes, I totally get it, man. And I think what Hector's going for here with implementing MFA is a perfect solution for some of these types of attacks that go on.
Exactly.
So this next section talks about how to protect yourself. And obviously, certainly at this point in our lives, we know that multi-factor authentication steps, whether it be entering something you have or something I was working with someone recently that the next step after you enter your username and password is a picture of like 30 pictures, and you have to pick the one that you associated with you when you first created your account. I do want to go back to something real quick with you guys. Bill, do you create passwords or do you create passphrases at this point?
Most of the time they're passphrases now, yes.
That's really good advice to people. I can't tell you how many people I see try to use the P and then the @ sign and all these things that really, computerized dictionaries are going to guess anyway. Yeah. But they say your odds of being hacked go way, way, way down in terms of password spraying, or what Bill was talking about a while ago with the rainbow attack. If you just use a passphrase, and maybe it's the favorite line to your favorite song, and it's always at the top of your head, and you can easily recall it, and you just maybe throw a special character on it or something, that reduces your odds greatly. And Ben, I know you're a musician. Do you ever use lyrics from a song for your passphrases?
Man, I'm a password guy, but I can use a fairly complex password. God, I hope a computer would never figure it out. But I've heard of people using phrases, and I haven't implemented that in my life yet. But I have always been the fan of a 13 to 15 to 20 character password.
Yeah. Well, and the passphrase thing isn't so much necessarily about not only being able to guess it, it's about you being able to remember it. Yeah. So complex, and you remember it all at the same time. And I give that to people as an example of maybe sharing with people in your organization or even your personal life, because it should very much limit the need to have to write the thing down if you just have 3 or 4 phrases that you use all over the place. And it also limits the amount of guessing that can be done. But let's move on here. So in this next section, these paragraphs here, Bill and Ben, Hector's addressing how to protect yourself against password spraying, which has been exploited a whole lot through the years. What's Hector covering here?
Well, like for me, in my personal experience, I actually had to demo this for a customer. I implemented the time-based one-time password off of our Citrix Cloud gateway, and it did exactly what the customer needed it to do. They just needed a second form factor. They wanted to ensure that there was another kind of, not barrier, but just another, sense of make sure this is the right person, make sure that we're communicating with them. They had some suspicious activity within their organization, and they just wanted to take another step. They didn't want to invest a lot of money. They did not have it in their budget to do this. So really good solution. They were a cloud customer already. We were able to turn this on for them for no cost. And now they have the one-time based password, and it's working great for them. At Citrix, we have multi-form factor, and we have it where it comes to us where we can swipe. And I think that's pretty cool, where, I log in, and then the next thing I'm receiving is a message to my text, and I can just swipe, and then it lets me get in. And I think it's cool, man. It's definitely a way to add another layer of security and ensuring it's the user that needs to get into the IP environment.
Yeah, so it's not only cool, but the idea that you've limited the amount of work the user has to do. So they're secure and they're not overly burdened by the process. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was just going to say these one-time passwords or time-based passwords is probably another way to put it. Go back a number of years. I can remember implementing them probably as long as a decade ago, maybe longer. Primarily focused around technologies from RSA, which I'm sure most of the listeners are familiar with, the old key fobs, where you'd have to, it went back to what you said earlier, Andy, something you are and something you have, or something you know and something you have, and they'd have to enter that 6 or 8 digit passkey at the website they were trying to join. A lot of folks didn't like that because they'd leave the passkey in their downstairs and they're upstairs, or they'd leave it in their office and they were in a conference room and they have to run back and get it to log in. So obviously with the ubiquity of mobile phones, a lot of these products now rely on the mobile phones for that function, but they can also do pushes to the mobile phones, kind of like what Ben was referring to, where you get a swipe or something that pops up and says, do you want to allow this connection? And it's pretty fascinating. You can click and immediately you get logged in, but it's really doing the same thing on the back end. In a sense, it's sending some sort of validation to a back end server and allowing the user in. So they've come a long way, and the mobile phone has certainly helped a lot in making it more widely accepted and widely used.
Yeah, because then all you got to do is rely on somebody to have their phone with them, which, if you're like most Americans these days, you probably don't go more than 5 minutes before going, hey, where's my phone?
Exactly. Which makes it more, more common and easier to deploy than having to worry about managing all those key fobs.
Yeah.
Now you guys are out in the marketplace more than I am. What's biometrics having to do with this? Man, are they getting to the point that biometrics is a reliable second form factor?
So let's talk about that, because back in my consulting days before I worked at Citrix, we had a product, and I can't remember what it was, text type or type text or something. I don't remember what it ended up being called, but it was really interesting. This is probably 2007 timeframe. And they had come up with a system that could look at the cadence at which you typed the password, and they would use that as a factor as to whether you were who you said you were. I love the idea. I had some problems getting that implemented and integrated in a Citrix environment, but in theory it worked pretty well. That's the last time I really went down the biometrics world, other than a fingerprint reader or something. Well, you know what? I got a Hello camera on my new laptop. I guess I use biometrics every day, but I don't actually use it to get into Citrix. But yeah, it's certainly becoming more and more. And I do think some people are to the point where, like a duo type solution, they can just look at their phone and that's good enough. I'm not sure. You guys tell me what you're seeing.
I'm not really seeing much.
I'm thinking Improbata
from there. Where what Ben was referring to, fingerprints and things like that. We saw them some in healthcare for a little while, but most of those folks went back to the tap and go type solution using the access card. And then of course you've got the Face ID on your iPhone that can be leveraged for access to the phone itself. And a lot of websites, bank sites and that sort of thing will rely on that if you allow it, to allow you to authenticate to your application and your data. Haven't seen that for anything like Citrix yet, although I suspect it may be there. We just don't configure it for most customers.
Like I've seen back when I was in healthcare, I know Improbata was doing some stuff where they could use the camera and some facial recognition stuff, or at least they were starting to do that. Speaking of the bank, my bank allows me to authenticate with my fingerprint, which I think is great when I'm in the car. If I'm waiting in my son's school line, I got to check in a second to check my bank account. It's nice being able to use my fingerprint to get in there.
Yeah, that's one advantage of the fingerprint. I'll agree with that because, I know on my bank you can use fingerprint or Face ID, and the phone I have doesn't have the fingerprint reader anymore. It's just Face ID. The problem is if you're wearing a mask, it doesn't recognize your face. So then you've got to take the mask off to get in. So it has its limitations, obviously.
So, no, I think that's funny because the first time my kids saw me not be able to use my Face ID, my 16-year-old immediately told me, Dad, they'll let you redo your face with the mask on.
Yeah, I know. I did that too.
Fix that.
Me too.
And I'm not so much talking about the technology, just the fact that my kids instantly figured that out, and I was dumbfounded as to, okay, what do I do next?
Yeah.
A sign of the times, man. A sign of the times.
For sure.
Hey, Ben, I think something interesting. You at your previous role, you were playing around with the Citrix Workspace Hub, and you guys were using the phone and proximity as well as maybe fingerprint scanning or something. What were you guys doing?
Where I was trying to go with this is I wanted it to be when the doctors walked in one of our buildings, that Workspace would be smart enough to know that they were in our building and go ahead and start their session up. So as they came in the building, the first thing I envisioned was it would ask them to biometrically authenticate themselves. The unit knew they were in our building. They could do some kind of authentication mechanism. It had to be easy because, to Bill's point, I tried to give doctors the RSA tokens one time, and it failed miserably. And it failed on the fact that they didn't want to keep up with it. So to everybody's point, you got to make it easy. So the thing that I thought would be easy is as they walked in, we just, let them do some kind of fingerprint or face recognition or whatever that would look like. And then the sessions would start on their phone. And their phone would kind of be the central repository for everything as far as the sessions go. And then, to your point, as they got near a Workspace Hub, which I was planning on putting in the exam rooms, that session would go from the phone to the Workspace Hub, and then they would work from the Workspace Hub. Chris Fleck does a demo where he's got the session on the Workspace Hub, but he's retained control with the phone. Now the phone's like a jog shuttle where he can control mouse and keyboard from the phone. That's where I wanted to see it go to. And then the other thing I had kind of dreamed, and I was talking to Chris about this, is doing some API integrations between the thin clients or the session to the EMR, where we could actually pass data of going, the doctor's in this exam room at this time, this patient's scheduled to be in that exam room. As the session's coming up and the EMR is logging in, go ahead and pull this patient up so that, again, as the session started, to make it very easy on the doctor, the patient's record would already be pulled up as they were coming in. But it would all start with a session starting on the phone, and then them somehow being very easily, hopefully through biometrics, being able to authenticate so the session could start, so it then could be, kind of teed up to be transferred to the Workspace Hub and back and forth.
Yeah, that sounds like exactly what Citrix is hoping to see people do. And if nothing else, some people aren't going to get there, but to give people the vision of what's possible, that's been a big part of Synergy for the last couple of years. And I think people are almost like with the typing thing that I mentioned a while ago. It's certainly something people can see coming in the future. It's just, how do we get there in such a way that people feel comfortable with it? But it's definitely the future. I mean, like we talked about a while ago, that silly phone thing is, it's with you most of the time. And if it's not, there should be other ways to get in that are very secure and a little more complex. But just having something like the phone proximity to the device that you're trying to log into that has access to that virtual session, it really isn't that hard to fathom that is possible.
Hey guys, I do want to shift gears here for a minute because I have a weakness, and that's something I've always promised your listeners, is that, areas that I'm weak in, I'll ask questions about. So can you two guys kind of give me an explanation of XenTegra and the capabilities of that? Because I see that kind of being one of the next topics here after the time-based one-time password is the XenTegra and what goes on there. And I've heard this term a lot. I've heard it a lot with, endpoint management and ADC, but I can't tell you 100% that I understand it. And I would love for you guys to explain it to me. I'm sure your listeners would also like that too.
So Ben, are you saying XenTegra just in general, or specifically as it applies to the Citrix product?
Both, if you don't mind. If you can compress it down to make it a simple, XenTegra explanation and how that applies to our products.
Bill, do you want to take it?
Sure. So as I understand it, and I am not an ADC expert by any means. I mean, I can do the basics, Ben, but XenTegra is always an area where I defer to the guys that are, the kind of propeller heads that are really sharp with NetScaler. But as I understand understand it, is XenTegra is really a mechanism that you can leverage to use what has been historically referred to as cascading authentication. So if I am an executive and I'm coming in from the inside using my standard AD password, then it lets me in. Another factor would be, okay, I'm an executive, but I'm coming in from the outside. I want to be two-factored. I'm an executive coming from a non-corporate device from the outside. So now I want to be presented with maybe more than one, or maybe more than two forms of authentication. Maybe I have a password, maybe I have a MFA, another factor of authentication like a Duo or Microsoft or RSA, something like that. And then maybe I have a third one. Maybe I have to answer a question or look at a picture or a CAPTCHA or something like that in order to get in. So XenTegra, as I understand it, is really designed to allow for that kind of multi-level authentication parameters for users in different scenarios. It allows you to have a lot more flexibility in how much you query the user before you let them in and get access to your environment. With that, Andy, is that consistent with your understanding?
It is. I think the N really represents a number of different ways you could authenticate a user in different ways for that to flow, whether it's directly from the ADC talking to X, Y, and Z in whatever order you want that to be. A great example is I see a lot of people in the past, they would implement a ADC solution that would talk to Active Directory first and then Radius second.
Right.
And my thought when I did those assessments would always be, no, do the Radius first so that it has to pass that test before it passes on to the Active Directory and then touches something of value in your world. And then you also factor in things like Citrix cloud services that may be able to talk directly out to a multi-factor solution service API calls, or it may need to call a ADC that then can use its historical ways of integrating with those services to authenticate the user and pass it back through. It's really the ability to leverage all those things in whatever order you think is appropriate, and at the end of the day, solve the challenge. I do want to ask both of you guys at some point, multi-factor as it relates to the Citrix cloud products, what's supported at this point, and then what's on the roadmap that you're aware of. But Ben, does that kind of help with the XenTegra story as it relates to Citrix and in general?
Sorry about that on mute. It does. I appreciate that.
Okay. So let me ask you guys this because it comes up in meetings. I think, Ben, it might have come up in a meeting we were in last week. What are the current supported multi-factor solutions from Citrix Cloud services for end-user interaction as well as for administering your portal access? And two questions, really.
Well, I think for administering the portal access, you now use the Citrix Authenticator for an admin to get into from an admin perspective to get into the admin portal. As far as two-factor on the Citrix gateway or with an on-premises solution, I think obviously I think MFA is supported, Microsoft's MFA rather, or Azure MFA. I think that I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but I think Duo might be, or is on the roadmap. Okta is. But I think I read an article recently, Andy, might be a blog article, might have been a support article that seemed to indicate something may be coming to allow access to on-premises Radius servers to solve the problem of multi-factor authentication, even in instances where it's not technically supported natively in the cloud. I don't know that much about that, but I read something about it recently.
Guess that gives you the catch-all, basically.
Yeah.
Have been anything about that not accurate? And I also want you to comment on the idea that Citrix has built into the product its own type of Radius solution in case you don't have a service you want to leverage.
Yeah, I think that's what I was talking about earlier that I had just demoed. Andy, what I'm going to do is for our next podcast, I want to get exactly to detail what this is because this is a moving target, and I do not want to give a wrong answer. So I will say I will come up with the right answer, and in our next podcast, I will have a list of services that we can identify both in cloud and both in ADC gateway.
Okay, that'd be great. Might as well go get the right answer, and that'll get people to tune back in. Right? That was your example of a cliffhanger, kind of like the old Dukes of Hazzard. What's going to happen after the commercial kind of thing.
Well, it really is a moving target because, the cloud gateway service group really has done a lot and is moving quick and turning things up. And I just don't want to give the wrong answer. And so I've done that once on this program. I promised myself I wouldn't do it again. So I would like to go back to the crowd and go, I'm on a podcast. I want to give an accurate answer and just, get really what reality is today and possibly what's coming in the future,
I don't know if you guys can see my screen, but I really do have a vision in my head of the General Lee jumping a river with Ben's head sticking out the window, and you're cutting the commercial. Sorry, you can cut out my head. Okay. All right. So let's wrap up. Let's wrap up what Hector's talking here, and here it goes back to what we talked about a while ago, which is user education, making people smarter around their passwords, making them understand where this is valuable to them. I mean, nobody wants to be inconvenienced. At the same time, nobody wants to be the reason for a breach that causes lots of pain and suffering across the board. So, what's Hector saying here in this user education part of the article?
I think, what's got to happen in the future is users are always going to be annoyed with passwords. They're always going to be annoyed with password complexity. I mean, I'll admit I got locked out of Citrix the other day, and it stopped me for about an hour and a half. I had to stop what I was doing, call support, get them to unlock the account. Something weird happened with Okta. We had to contact them. So it's got to get easier. And I just see biometrics kind of being that way. You were talking about me being a musician. It's hard for me to believe in the future that your voice couldn't be something that you could be ID'd against, your eye, just easier ways, your fingerprints. And just, I think where it needs to head, and hopefully it will head one day, we're Star Trek-ish at this point, is you don't have to worry about a password. It's you. That's the password, and your being that gives you access, and how that comes to pass, I don't know. You're always going to struggle with users and passwords. Like, I will admit, Bill said something at the top of this broadcast that I cringed a little bit because I'm guilty of it. I will use a common password across multiple services. And I know as a cybersecurity engineer that is bad, but yet I do it, and I'm guilty of it. And I know if I do it and I'm conscious of it, how many people are doing it not even really aware that they've set up that scenario?
Well, we haven't really talked about this at all, but really getting down to identity management services where you don't have to have 15 different identities across 15 different things. You could have one that everything goes back and talks to you. And then, as you were pointing out just now, Ben, the ability for that to recognize, not that you gave it proper information, but that you are who you are. I mean, our Alexa at home the other day said, "Hey, this sounds like Andy. Would you like me to realize that this is Andy going forward?" I was like, "Well, I think so. I'm not sure, but I think so."
Careful what you say, right?
Yeah, there's no telling what that thing hears in my house. I just things just run through my head. Well, guys, that's
I learned a lesson early about smart home. I learned a lesson early about smart homes. My wife and I are going through another couple's home, and the husband, who's all gear-headed and understanding how this works, we walk in their bedroom and he goes, "Light turn on, yada yada yada," and thing turns on. The wife looks at my wife and goes, "I just missed the day that I could flip the switch." And so that kind of told me, some electronics is cool, but some of them, be careful what you wish for. Like, I'll be real honest with you, I'm glad that I've never had a Facebook account, because there's so much turmoil going on with that right now that I can kind of go, I didn't voluntarily get in the mix. Now, my wife, she's got one, so I'm out there in her account, so I do have a presence out there, but it just, some of this scares me. Like Alexa scares me. Some of it is just almost too close to home.
So, Ben, I thought you were going to go with the story. Your wife walked in and the Alexa said, "Hey, Janet, welcome back. Would you like the lights turned down again?"
Oh.
That's got to happen. It's got to happen.
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
Well, guys, I got to wrap up. I got another call to jump on. Then I got 2 more podcasts to do. I think I got a Nutanix podcast today and maybe another one. But I appreciate you guys jumping on. And look, anytime we can jump on and continue the content coming and give people something of value to listen to, it's phenomenal. That's the whole point here.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it, Andy. Thank you for having me on as always.
All right, guys. Well, with that, we'll wrap this one up and we'll do it again next week.
Hey, I hope everybody has a good week.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Citrix Session with your hosts, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton. A special thanks to our guest for attending today's podcast. Podcast produced by Pete Downing. For any input, or if you'd like to be a part of our podcast, please email us at info@XenTegra.com. Please head over to XenTegra.com/podcast to listen to all podcasts in this series. This podcast is copyrighted by XenTegra LLC.